U.S. intelligence warned the nation of Israel of a potential clash in Gaza days before the attack. This is new intelligence coming out as we come on air today regarding the Israeli-Hamas war. I guess that's what we would call it at this stage. I want to back up because I did this over the last couple of days, and I think it is of interest to you, and I think it would be a great educational opportunity to kind of back up and review what Hamas is and why Hamas is in power, because we are falling into the trap, and I'm watching us do it, and I'm watching the mainstream media lead us down this rabbit hole. Because we are good human beings, we fall into this trap that is regularly set by Islamic radicals, particularly Islamic radicals that want to destroy the nation of Israel, Islamic radicals that want to destroy all the Jews and then move on to the Christians. Because let me assure you, the same radical ideology that wants to kill the Jews, they want to kill the Christians too, or subjugate you, or convert you. I mean, if we want to get into the religious nature of what's going on over there, I'm happy to do that. But first, I think we need to reset the political nature of what's going on. When we first learned about this last Saturday, not a week ago, this dastardly, evil attack on innocent individuals, killing over 1,000 of them in their own countries, as almost 300 people died at that music festival in southern Israel, right? Almost 300. They were mowing them down with machine guns. They were laying waste to innocent individuals. I am fascinated with the idea that we're getting caught up as to whether or not there were 40 beheaded babies or 1 beheaded baby or 12 beheaded babies. You know what they are? There's a lot of dead babies at the hands of Islamic radicals that believe that Jews are not human beings. And therefore, they don't have a problem with slaughtering them. Not a week ago, it happened. But just because this is the most egregious and devastating attack in the last several decades does not mean that it's the only one. These things have happened with a fair amount of regularity over the years, over my lifetime, where call the terrorist organization by their name, whether it's PLO, whether it is ISIS, which is essentially what we're dealing with at this stage in Gaza and in that region of the world, whether you call them Hamas, they are terrorist organizations that at their very core are religious in nature. Not all Muslim people believe in this type of radical jihad, but many do. And we should be aware of that. There's nothing wrong with being aware of that. There's nothing wrong with calling it out. As a matter of fact, there's something wrong with not calling it out because you fall into the trap that so many of us seem to fall into when these things happen. And here's the trap that I'm describing. Evil people that are universally described as evil do evil things. And everyone says, oh, that's horrible. Violence of any kind is horrible. Even the appeasers, even the AOCs of the squads of the world, the Ilhan Omars of the world. Oh, well, violence is never the answer, and violence is always horrible, and we have to stop the violence on both sides. They start there, right? And so the state of Israel determines that they need to respond to eradicate the immediate and present threat of future and further violence against the people and to hold those committing the violence responsible. So they respond. Israel has an ability, because they've been doing this for a hot minute, to respond in force with the IDF. And so they do. Because of the nature of the enemy that they face, they recognize that oftentimes this enemy will hide behind the cloak of innocent civilians. Hamas and the PLO before them, they've been doing this since the creation of the state of Israel. It is the very definition of they throw a rock and they hide their hand. You know, you get a crowd of people and, you know, you're given, let's say, for example, Headless Bell K is giving a TED Talk, right? About, I don't know, why ABBA is the greatest band in the history of the earth.
That's a long TED Talk.
I mean, this is not your standard 15-minute TED Talk. This one's going to be 2-3 hours of Bell going over their entire discography, their entire catalog, and, you know, working song by song.
And that's without playing any of the music. It'll be 3 hours without the music.
Oh, sure. No, that's lecture. And so during his TED Talk, you know, there's an assembled group of people. And the assembled group of people, somebody picks up a rock and throws the rock out of the assembled group of people and hits Bell right on his face, right on his nose. I know. Dastardly. And Bell wants to know, and then they look around. Oh, who threw that? That's awful. That's horrible. Well, everyone else around them is sick of Bell's TED Talk too. And they didn't have the strength of their courage of conviction to throw the rock themselves, but they ain't telling who threw the rock. And so Bell demands to know, and the security starts looking around. Who threw the rock? Who threw the rock? I don't know. I don't know who threw the rock. Maybe it was that guy. Maybe it's that guy. I think it came from over there.
You tell me who threw the rock, or I'm going to start playing the songs.
Well, that's kind of the way it goes in the real world, too. Now, I don't mean to kid because there's so much evil in the world. I'm trying to lighten it up just a little bit, but I will say this. The Islamic radicals that commit these types of heinous evil acts, they either act at the pleasure of, with the knowledge of, or under the cloak of Gaza. Does that mean that there are not people in Gaza who are relatively innocent to all of this going on around them? Of course. But the people of Gaza voted for Hamas in 2006. Once Israel decided to remove the IDF from the Gaza Strip, and largely from the West Bank, but primarily from the Gaza Strip, Hamas took over. They had elections. There is a government run by Hamas, and they've done a horrible job of running their government because they will not negotiate or sit down with the Israeli people, with the Israeli government. The Israeli government is willing and ready to, if they are to negotiate certain terms of a peace settlement, give them every opportunity to get humanitarian aid in there. And humanitarian aid comes in there on almost a weekly basis. Of the 2.2 million people in that region, over 1 million of them survive on humanitarian aid. And that's not because the Israeli people prevent them from getting more. It's because the Palestinians, in the form of Hamas, will not negotiate a settlement with the Israelis to find a way to peace in that region because they are interested in one thing, and that's killing the Jews. So sadly, as the Israeli government attempts to prevent collateral damage, there will be collateral damage, and that is on purpose. And it's based out of a theory by Hamas that if they hide behind the civilian population, they can get away with throwing that rock and hiding their hand. And so they do. And so if you're wondering why the Israeli government and the IDF tells the citizens of Gaza that they need to mobilize up to 1 million people to the southern portions of the Gaza Strip, that is the Israeli government bending over backwards to try to save civilian lives because they know that the terrorists have embedded themselves within the civilian population. And the civilian population is either complicit or they are too afraid to say anything about it. What I would suggest to you is that we are better served on mainstream media declaring this a liberation of the Palestinian people, not an occupation and not a destruction, a liberation. Because they're either complicit in this or they're being held ultimately hostage by the Hamas government. And they deserve better. Because the Hamas, they don't know how to govern people. They know how to kill Jews. They've been trying to do this since 2006, and they have failed miserably. And they've not failed because of the state of Israel. They have failed because their singular focus is killing Jews, not helping their own people lead a better life. And all of it's funded by, well, for the most part, the funding comes from Iran, who also funds Hezbollah in Lebanon. But that's another subject for another day. Hamas was a militant movement that was born out of the Muslim Brotherhood back in the 1980s. And they are a more religious sect of the PLO. Remember Yasser Arafat? Yasser Arafat wasn't extreme enough for these people. No, seriously. That's the truth. And because of that, they had infighting, and now they have a split of governance, where the PLO governs the West Bank, and Gaza is governed by Hamas. And most Palestinians hate it. They hate the fact that they're not governed by the same people, and they hate the fact that they don't have elections anymore. But the PLO won't have elections because they're worried that Hamas has scared the hell out of their population so much that Hamas would take over the West Bank too. Literally 25 plus countries around the globe, including the European Union, Great Britain, the United States of America, and others, have designated Hamas as a terrorist organization. Iran provides it with its material and financial support. Qatar and Turkey, they harbor the leadership. By the way, that's another aspect to this. They throw that rock. You know, in my crowd analogy where Bell's giving his TED talk on ABBA and the rock comes and it hits him and Bell's like, I'm going to find out who threw that rock. And if y'all don't tell me who threw that rock, I'm going to blame all of you for it. Well, the guy that threw the rock or the guy that ordered the rock to be thrown, they left. They're up in a fancy box somewhere watching all of this happen. Leadership of Hamas, they don't stay in Gaza. They stay in Qatar. And some of them stay in Turkey. Because they're not going to be a part of what they create, which is chaos. And we, as an American people, and particularly the mainstream media, we fall into this trap where they kill Jewish people or Israeli people, and most of the times those two overlap, but not always. And in this case, they killed Americans, and they killed people from Great Britain and people from Germany and people from Brazil and all over the world. Israel responds with force. They hide behind the civilian population. And when a few civilians get killed, the appeasers stand up and say, oh, we must stop the violence. We have to stop the violence. You see how that works? You kill a few of mine, and then immediately the appeasers scream that we must stop the violence before we root out the people that were responsible for throwing the rock in the first place. At some point, the cycle has to stop. At some point, we have to look as the Israeli government. Of course, they're never going to govern Gaza or the Palestinian people in the manner in which they govern their own in Israel. But I look at them as liberators. Just as we looked at the American forces in Germany as liberators. Does that mean that some of the German people weren't collaborators? No. Some of them were. Some of them were complicit. Some of them had no knowledge of the concentration camps whatsoever. But regardless, the American forces that went into Germany, we looked at them as the liberators of a nation that was besieged by a dictatorial madman hell-bent on world domination. You tell me that I'm not talking about Hamas right now. Kick butt, take names. And for those civilians in Gaza, I am not immune to feeling heartfelt sympathy for them if they genuinely want to get the hell out. But they are prisoners, and they would declare themselves as such if that's what they really believe.